Have you heard the story about the 12 brothers, the 12 coffins, and the little girl with the star on her forehead? It's the one that ends with the stepmother being sentenced to death in the barrel filled with... well, how about I just read it for you? Once upon a time, there was a king and queen that had 12 sons. And the queen was pregnant, and the king said, if the next child is a daughter, then I'm going to kill all of the young boys so the daughter can inherit the fortune. The mother was sworn not to tell the sons, and the king had 12 little coffins built for each of them. Eventually though, the mother was overwhelmed by guilt and showed the sons the 12 little coffins built for them and helped them run away. She said that they should run out to the forest and keep watch, and she would put up a flag depending on which child was born. If it was a son, she would raise a white flag. If it was a daughter, it would be a red flag, so they should run away. After the boys survived a short time in the woods, they did see a flag raise up, but unfortunately, it was a red flag. The mother had given birth to a daughter. So the boys went deeper into the forest until they came across an enchanted hut and decided to live there. In revenge against their youngest sister, they swore that the first woman they would come across, they would slay on the spot. The 11 older brothers decided to go hunting. The youngest brother, Benjamin, who was named after the Bible, would stay home and cook the meals and make sure that the hut was kept in good order while the 11 older brothers would go out hunting each day. The brothers enjoyed living out there, and before long 10 years had passed. Back at the castle, the little girl was now 10 years old. She was good of heart, fair of face, and had a gold star on her forehead. One day they decided to wash everything they could find in the castle, and she came across 12 shirts that were too small for her father. So she asked her mother, who do these shirts belong to? They're too small for Dad. The queen answered with a heavy heart, you had 12 older brothers. The daughter asked, well, where are they? I haven't heard of them before. And the queen said, well, your father promised to kill them if you were born a girl to ensure your inheritance. I was able to help them escape secretly, but I don't know exactly where they are anymore. The little princess decided that she would then go and find her older brothers and see what they were doing after all this time. She took the 12 shirts that they had found during the cleaning and went straight into the forest. Luckily, she found them pretty quickly. She came up to the hut, and it was in the middle of the day, so all the boys were out hunting, except Benjamin. He was startled, and he asked her, who are you? Where do you come from? And she replied, I'm a king's daughter, seeking my 12 brothers, and I'll walk as far as the sky is blue to find them. She showed Benjamin the 12 shirts, and said, these are the shirts of my brothers. Benjamin recognized the shirts and burst into tears and hugged her and said, yeah, you're my little sister. And they began to weep for joy and danced around and hugged. Then he remembered the promise that he and his brothers had made. They would kill the first girl that they came across. And he knew that his brothers were coming back soon. So he told her to hide in the house when they came back. Not long later, the others came back from hunting, and their dinner was ready. They were sitting at the table ready to eat, and one of the brothers asked Benjamin, was there any news today? And Benjamin said, oh, you don't know? No, they said. You've been in the forest, and I've been at home, and I still know more than you. And they're like, yeah, get on with it. What do you know? And he's like, all right, I'll tell you, but you have to promise me that you won't kill the first maiden you see. And they said, yes, all right, just she'll have mercy. Just tell us what you know. And then he said, our sister's here. And he pulled her out. And the king's daughter came forth with the royal garments and the golden star on her forehead, and all the brothers rejoiced. Now for the time being, she stayed home with Benjamin and helped him out with the work. The 11 older brothers still went into the forest to hunt and catch them food. And the little sister and Benjamin cooked it for them. They took care of the wood and collecting vegetables and herbs and tidying up the house. Outside of the little house, however, was a little garden, which stood 12 lily flowers. She thought it would look nice to give to each of the brothers and have it on their dinner table, so she went and plucked them one by one. But as she was plucking these flowers, each of the brothers turned into ravens and flew off into the forest. Now, the young girl was all alone in the wild forest, and as she looked around, an old woman who was standing near her said, what have you done? Why did you not leave the 12 flowers alone? They were your brothers, and now they've changed into ravens. Bruce started crying, and she said, is there any way to save them? There is one way, and it's so hard that you will not be able to do it. You must stay mute for 7 years. You may not speak or laugh. If you say one single word in the entire 7 years, it will all be lost, and your brothers will be killed. But the maiden was determined. She said, I will set my brothers free. She went to the highest tree she could find and seated herself in it, and she neither spoke nor laughed. Not long after this, a king began hunting in the forest. not the same king from the start, this is a different king. His hunting dogs found her in the tree and started snarling and barking at her. The king came by and he saw this beautiful young girl sitting in the tree with a golden star shining in her forehead and asked her to come down. But she shook her head. He said, "Would you be my wife?" And she shook her head again. He climbed up the tree himself, carried her down and placed her on his horse, and took her home to his castle. They did marry, even though she didn't really say yes, but they lived pretty happily for a few years. But the king's mother, who was a wicked woman, began to slander the young queen. She would say horrible things about her to the king, saying, "She's a common beggar girl. Who knows what she gets up to, what sort of tricks she plays. She can't even speak. She can't even laugh. And anyone who can't laugh has a bad conscience." At first, the king didn't really believe what his mother was saying, but over time, it slowly got to him. Eventually, the wicked mother convinced him to sentence her to death. A great fire was lit in the courtyard where the young girl was sentenced to be burnt. She was bound to the stake, and the fire was licking at her clothes. But just before she was burned, the 7 years expired, and the 12 ravens came flying down from the forest, landed on the ground and freed her. They tore the fire asunder, extinguished the flames, and set their dear sister free, and kissed and embraced her. Now, finally, she could open her mouth, and she told the king why she could never speak and why she could never laugh. The king rejoiced when he found out that she was innocent. It was the wicked stepmother instead who was put on trial, taken before a judge and sentenced to death, put into a barrel filled with boiling oil and venomous snakes, and died an evil death. So the 12 Brothers is an interesting fairy tale because it divides pretty neatly into two parts, shifts focus completely in the middle, even changing protagonist from Benjamin, the younger brother, to the princess, who is unnamed. It's also an interesting look at gender roles and relationships around that time. Although I'm not really sure if turning into ravens or having stars in your foreheads are traditionally tied to one gender or another. It's worth mentioning that in the original version of the tale, the king has a slightly different reason for wanting to kill his sons. In the one we just read, he would kill them so his daughter would inherit his wealth, but in the original he just really didn't want a daughter. It wasn't really explained, but he just said that he'd rather cut off all the heads of the sons rather than having a girl among them. It's a bit strange, but that's fairy tales, right? In the current version, where the king wishes his daughter to inherit the wealth, it was perhaps changed to be a joke about, or even a jab at, the practice of inheritance. Sons, especially the firstborn, would often inherit everything, with daughters expected to marry into another family instead. By turning this on its head, by having the father willing to kill to ensure his daughter will inherit, it's a bit funny and quite egalitarian for the time. It's also interesting in this tale that the father is the one who seeks to murder his children. Usually in fairy tales, it's the mother, or usually the stepmother, who has murderous intent against the little ones. In fairy tales, there's a lot of conflict between women in families. Stepmothers turning on children, mother-in-laws attacking brides. You may think that women in general were more often villains in these stories, but men are commonly villains too. The wicked witch or evil stepmother is usually what comes to mind when you think of fairy tale villains, but that one's Disney's fault. Conflict usually doesn't breach gender lines. If the main character is male, the villain is more often male. And if the main character is female, the villain is probably going to be female too. Most of Disney's fairy tale movies had female protagonists, so the villains were more often female. Despite other stories having male villains, it's exceptional that a king is playing the villain this time. Kings are usually shown as symbols of divine order, and while they can be tricked or misled, like the king at the second half of the story, they're not usually bad people. Just a side note, this is the first fairy tale we've covered on the channel that actually has a wicked stepmother. Although it's interesting that she was first specifically described just as the king's mother, but it was only after she was charged with slander that she was called the stepmother. In some versions of the story, the stepmother goes into lurid detail about what crimes the young queen committed, including things like cannibalizing children or giving birth to animals. Anyway, back to the video. So the story of 12 Brothers shows off both male and female villains and heroes in a single story. At the start of the story, the main characters are brothers, specifically Benjamin. For this section of the story, the king is the villain, threatening to kill them and forcing them to flee. Once the story shifts so that the daughter was the focus, the villain changes to the mother-in-law, the king's stepmother. So Benjamin is quite a pious character in this. He's the 12th son of his family, explicitly said to be named after a character in the Bible. The Benjamin in the Bible was the 12th son of Jacob. It's difficult to give a quick summary of who Jacob was, but it's enough to say that he's a very important figure in the Old Testament and important to all the Abrahamic religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. The biblical Benjamin's mother died in childbirth, giving birth to him. And it's a similar idea to the mother in the tale of the 12 brothers, because we have a mother who is unable to help her sons. And surprisingly enough, this relates to the brothers inexplicably turning into birds halfway through the story. So the brothers are turned into ravens, and it's a little bit random for modern audiences. Why ravens? This is another one of those things that doesn't make a lot of sense to most of us these days, but it definitely did when the story was written. Now, I'm probably going to mispronounce this, but the boys turning into ravens meant their mother was a raven's mother. Literally, a mother of ravens, which is a German word meaning a mother who mistreats her child or doesn't take proper care of them. I don't think this child is entirely fair. The boy's mother protected them as best she could. You can't really do much if your husband is the king and is intent on killing your boys. So that this story was written down by the Grimms in their fairy tale collection. The Grimms were known to slightly adjust the tales to make them more palatable to the readers at the time, but also to promote values they thought were desirable. In this story specifically, it promotes industry, hard work, cleanliness, and order, all virtues that the Grimms prized. This book was going to be on every child's bookshelf, and the Grimms knew it. In fact, the Grimms explicitly wanted to use the book to promote certain values. They were writing at the time of the Napoleonic Wars, and they wanted to promote Germanic nationalism through their stories. Something interesting to note is the daughter's star on her forehead. It's a sign that undeniably marks her as royalty, giving her a literal connection to the heavens, as royals often claim to have. It's a little bit of wordplay too. At the time, the word for star was stern, and the word for forehead was stone. The star in her forehead is a sign of divine power. Throughout the story, the daughter holds the power of life and death over the brothers. It starts before she's even born, with the king threatening to kill her brothers if she's born a girl, and continues when they transform into ravens and when she's bound to silence to keep them alive. Despite this power, she keeps sacrificing herself for her brothers. She gives up her inheritance and humbly works in their home, and then keeps silent for 7 years and was almost going to be burned at the stake for them. The entire time she held the power of life and death over her brothers, but she sacrificed herself again and again to keep them alive. She's perhaps one of the strongest female characters in the Brothers Grimm collection, despite being silent, literally and metaphorically. We can see the virtues that the Grimms thought suitable for girls through the women in this story. The mother and the daughter doing everything they can to support their family, even giving up their wealth and comfort. The princess could have easily stayed in her castle and lived the high life, but she instead chose to seek out and stay with their brothers in a cottage in the forest. In contrast, we see the wicked stepmother plotting and lying about the daughter, the new queen. Her lies end up being her own downfall, and she pays the ultimate price for it. Through these three women, we see multiple ways of moving through the troubles in a domestic setting, which was the extent of a woman's life in the times when the story was written. Of course, things are a little bit different these days, but it's easy to see echoes in modern society. We may not have fathers murdering a dozen sons to make sure his daughter will inherit, but parents with a favourite aren't exactly uncommon. And mother-in-laws may not have as much power in the household as they used to, but they can sure make family gatherings unpleasant if they want to. Careless gossip, or worse, outright lies, can ruin a family's relationship with each other, as much as parents unashamedly having favourites amongst the children. It's a reminder that, even though the bond between parent and child is unique and often quite strong, it's not unbreakable and must be met with respect from both sides. So I tried a few new things in the video today, so let me know what you think. And remember, if you like this kind of content, then make sure to subscribe for more. I've been your host, More They Duke, and I hope you have a good day.